Hello everybody, welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips, and very soon, August 6th, is our next Introduction to Plant-Based Nutrition. And remember, it is time to get registered for fall semester starting now. I know you guys like to wait till the last minute, but I would have to tell you, it's really not fun for us when you do that. So let's try and get the stuff in earlier. Let's all make a midsummer resolution to not make the people at the Wellness Forum crazy for fall semester this year. All right, I have two things to talk about, both of which I think are kind of interesting. And we'll start with the first one. Has to do with overweight people, how they become that way. And a lot of times the judgment is made that these people must lack discipline and self-control and that sort of thing. And there's no question that there's an element of discipline in organizing your life to enjoy better health. I mean, you have to learn about what the right diet is, and you have to shop and prepare foods and make time for exercise. And those are activities that require some discipline. But people don't become overweight because they're slothful human beings. They're helped a lot by everything from advertising to easy access to cheap foods that, by the way, are addictive. And I've always said that, it's people recognize that recreational drugs are addictive, alcohol can be addictive, smoking is addictive, but I don't necessarily associate these properties with food. Well, a recent study, researchers at Boston Children's Hospital concluded that eating a meal high in refined carbohydrates decreased glucose levels, increased hunger, and stimulated certain regions of the brain associated with addiction as much as 4 hours after eating this stuff. And how they did it was kind of interesting. They took overweight or obese men who were between the ages of 18 and 25, and then they randomized them to eat two versions of the same milkshake. They had similar ingredients, calories, appearance, taste, and smell, but one had slow-acting refined carbohydrate in it. The other had so one had slow-acting carbohydrates, one had highly refined carbohydrates, and the guys couldn't tell the difference, and they didn't indicate any preference for one over the other. But here's what was interesting. The participants eating the high glycemic index meal had a rapid rise in blood glucose levels, 2.4 times higher than people eating the slower-acting, complex carbohydrates. Their blood sugar levels then crashed. Of course, we know that's what happens when you eat this kind of food. And the group reported excessive hunger 4 hours after eating that meal. And it's because of the crash in blood sugar levels, high absorption and fast crash, as opposed to when you eat something with a lot of fiber that slows the absorption of glucose into the system. But what was really interesting is the researchers used MRI to look at cerebral blood flow and the effects of these different meals on the brain. The participants eating the high glycemic index meal all showed, every single one of them, showed high activation in the area of the brain that is related to addiction. And this is what causes people to want to eat more and more of these foods. And we're all familiar with the syndrome. While our choice of food might be different, it's the same thing. So for me, the more chocolate I eat, the more I want. For somebody else, it might be potato chips. The more potato chips they eat, the more they want. And the reason is that these foods stimulate the dopamine receptors in the brain. It's pleasurable to eat this stuff. So it isn't just all about willpower, because I know a lot about why I'm not supposed to eat bad foods, but if you fill my house with chocolate, sooner or later I'll be eating chocolate instead of dinner. It's not a willpower issue, it's an environmental issue. So I'm going to advise everybody to do two things. If you have not yet sanitized your environment from bad foods, get rid of the stuff so you're not tempted. And the other thing is have a little compassion for people who may not understand why they can't eat a few potato chips and they keep trying to do it. They haven't had the benefit of the education that you've had. So get them to join the Wellness Forum so we can get them this information too. All right, the other thing starts on a bit of a sad note. I want to talk about suicide risk, but on the positive note, what we can do to help prevent suicide. I think a lot of us know somebody who's committed suicide, or you know a classmate who did, or you know somebody whose family has been impacted by this dreadful event. And I know it's very hard to imagine the depths of depression and unhappiness that would lead somebody to take their life. We do know that taking psychiatric drugs increases the risk of suicidal ideation in both children and adults, which is another reason to stay away from these drugs. But let's talk about something positive. How can we reduce the risk of suicide? And believe it or not, one of the ways to do it is exercise. Now, I found this study very interesting. I'm going to talk about It was done in Sweden, and it showed that poor cardiovascular fitness in early adulthood is correlated to higher suicide risk later on. The study was absolutely enormous. It included 1,136,527 Swedish men who had completed mandatory health exams in order to get into the military. And those with mental illness or some type of ongoing psychiatric disorder at the time were excluded from the study, which further made it credible. And what they basically discovered is that depression alone doesn't account for suicidal ideation, that poor cardiovascular fitness was correlated with later suicide risk, and that poor cardiovascular fitness and poor cognitive function at the time of initial evaluation increased the risk by 5 times. That's very significant. The researchers pointed out several potential mechanisms of action, all of which are plausible to me, including social, psychological, and biological. For example, activities like sports that improve fitness also improve self-esteem, and there are opportunities for social interaction. A feeling of belonging and better self-esteem are associated with better outcomes and lower risk of suicide. The lead researcher also stated that physical activity might contribute to better brain function and better coping strategies in times of stress. So again, the study is important for several reasons. The large cohort obviously make it important. The exclusion of people who were suicidal at the time of initial, or who were mentally depressed at the initial evaluation, were excluded. But it also points to the importance of treating people, the whole person, when we're dealing with depression, anxiety, suicide risk, etc. We keep wanting to inflict this biological model of psychiatric care where people are given drugs to treat a chemical imbalance, when it really is the totality of their diet, their lifestyle, their life experiences, and perhaps the need for the right type of therapy. The other thing I want to point out is that isn't it unfortunate that some people at the age of 18 are already unhealthy and suffering from cognitive issues that predispose them to suicide at a later point in life, but also all kinds of other things. If your cardiovascular fitness is poor at the age of 18, boy, that's a bad way to start adulthood. So let's really get ourselves geared up to do something about children's health. I think it's extraordinarily important. Well, that's all for now. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, and I'll be back to you next week.